Hi, my dear students. I'm Dr. Jeetu. This is the last chapter from a perio part. It is dental implants and some miscellaneous topics put together. I have referred Karansa's 13th edition, but don't get disheartened by seeing the volume of information that is given in Karansa. It is very vast. In multiple choice point of view, you don't need that much. So whatever is very important for you and very important in the multiple choice point of view has been put together in this presentation. Let's go into the presentation. So we all know what dental implants are. The basic thing about implant is called the implant geometry or implant macro design. How the implant looks like or what is its basic outline. First is end-osseous implant. From the term it is very clear, it is placed inside the bone. It is end-osseous. So this end-osseous can be of different shapes. It is given in the figure. It can be blade-like placed inside the bone. It can be like a pin. It can be root form or cylindrical, and that is the commonest form of dental implant. You all would have noticed the implants placed nowadays. You would have assisted or at least you would have seen they are mostly root form cylindrical implants. They can be disc shaped, they can be screw shaped, they can be tapered and screw shaped. So all these are end-osseous implants. The second geometry is subperiosteal. Subperiosteal means it is placed just beneath the periosteum, adapted on the surface of the jaw bone. The third one is called transmandibular implants. In this case we have long rods or posts and they are placed through the anterior mandible. It uses the subperiosteal and the endosteal components and it pierces both the cortical plates. That is how transmandibular implants are. Now there is a fourth type also, that is called the transmucosal type. Here we use the support of the mucosa and obviously it is not as strong as the first three types. As I already mentioned, the most common implant design used today is the screw-shaped or the threaded cylindrical implant. It engages the bone very well and it achieves a good primary stability. There are two types of stability when it comes to implant, primary stability and secondary stability. If the implant can engage the bone well, it is called the primary stability. And what is secondary stability? It is how the bone is going to respond to the implant inserted and the remodeling process. So this threaded cylindrical implants or the screw shaped implants can achieve a very good primary stability. Majority of the cases they are near parallel, so that it is retentive also. Tapered implants have also been used and mostly it is used in extraction sockets. Now first we were seeing about implant macro design or implants geometry. What is the major outline of the implant? Coming to micro design or the implant surface characteristic, that is how the implant surface is, what is the texture. It can be modified using two type of processes, additive processes and subtractive processes. Additive processes means we are adding some materials or chemicals to the surface of the implant. This can be mineral coatings, we can do plasma spraying, bio coating with some growth factors, fluorides, some cements containing calcium phosphates, sulfates or carbonates. So all these we are doing to improve the osseo integration of the implant to the bone. This is the additive process. Coming to subtractive process, here we remove something from the implant surface and hence we alter the existing surface of the implant. This can be done by machining or it can be done by acid etching or blasting like sand blasting or aluminum blasting or a combination of any of these three techniques, machining, acid etching, blasting or a combination. Now we have seen the implants macro design and micro design. Now what is the chemical composition? What an implant is made up of? It is made up of CP titanium or commercially pure titanium or alloys of titanium. Titanium, why titanium is very important? Because it is a reactive metal and it oxidizes within nanoseconds after its exposure to air. So titanium forms a titanium oxide layer. Because of this passive oxide layer, titanium becomes very resistant to corrosion. After it forms this oxide layer, it is the most resistant thing. So rougher the surface, it is better. Why? Because there is increased fibronectin, PGE2 or prostaglandin E2 and growth factors like TGF beta on the surface of the titanium formed. Now a word about the biological width of the implant. We know the biological width of a tooth is considered as 2.04 millimeters, right? It is the width of the junctional epithelium plus the connective tissue fibers. When it comes to implant, it is always greater. The biologic width of an implant ranges from 3 to 4 millimeters. Here 2 millimeter is the epithelial attachment or the junctional epithelium, plus the 1 to 2 millimeters is the remaining supracrustal connective tissue. So it is 2 plus 2, that is almost 4 millimeters. When in contrast on natural tooth it was 2.04 millimeters, and that was 0.97 millimeters of junctional epithelium and 1.07 millimeters of connective tissue attachment. Now the normal remodeling around an externally hexed implant in the first year, this is a very important question. After you place an implant, the normal remodeling around this implant is 1 to 1.5 millimeters. This is accepted. 1 to 1.5 millimeters of remodeling around a externally hexed implant in the first year is accepted. After the first year of function of the implant, it should be expected to be 0.1 millimeters or less than that. Now that the osseointegration and the remodeling, everything is done, the remodeling expected is very minimum, that is 0.1 millimeters or less than that. So as we all know, after we place an implant into the bone, we have to wait for at least 4 to 6 months before we load the implant, or before we give a crown and it will start to be in function. So that is understood. Similarly, lack of loading can also be detrimental to the implant. You are placing an implant and you are not loading it at all. This can lead to cortical bone resorption, and this is known as stress shielding. So when you hear the term stress shielding, all of a sudden you may not be able to relate to this concept. Just remember that the stress is shielding the cortical bone. When you are loading it or when you are giving the stress only, the cortical bone is shielded. In the absence of stress, the cortical bone will resorb. Similarly, two critical measures that the implant can take. One is micro movements. The maximum that an implant and bone interface can take is 150 micrometers. After 150 micrometers, this will impair the differentiation of osteoblast and a fibrous scar will form. So instead of osseointegration, you will get fibrous integration, which is not strong. Similarly, so micro movements maximum allowed is 150 micrometers. Similarly, critical temperature. When you are drilling an implant into the bone, you have to have copious irrigation. If you are not irrigating, it increases the temperature of the site. So, for an exposure time of 1 minute, the maximum temperature that the bone can take is 47 degrees Celsius. Above this temperature, the alkaline phosphatase of the bone will denature, and this is going to fail the implant. So now we know the general characteristics of implant. You know the macro design, you know the micro design, the composition, the modifications, the additive process, the subtractive process, the chemical composition, some critical measures that the implant can take. Now placing the implant, the site preparation. First, for the initial penetration, you use a small round burr. Just like for cavity preparation, you use a small round burr. Just like that. Then a small twist drill which is 2 mm in diameter, and it is marked to various length. In the speed that should be used is 800 to 1500 rpm. That is the speed that should be used for the first twist drill. Then we have a pilot drill. Pilot drill that is having a 2 mm diameter non-cutting guide at the apical end, and at the midsection it will have a more diameter, that is 3 mm. So it is slightly tapered. The final drill that is used in the osteotomy site preparation for a standard 4 mm implant is a 3 mm twist drill. So, if you have a 4 mm implant, the implant site preparation should not be done up to 4 mm. It should be 3 mm, and it is considered that the bone has a slight amount of elasticity. So, the implant can go inside the bone, expand it, and then the bone will come back to its original position, giving a snug fit to the implant. Then we have a countersink drilling. This is used to flare the crustal aspect of the osteotomy site, just like we have the Gates-Glidden burr, right? The countersink drill, it is used to flare the crustal aspect. In dense cortical bone, you have an extra procedure, that is a bone tapping may be necessary. And the bone tapping, if you are doing, and the implant insertion should be done at very slow speed. You have to use only 20 to 40 RPMs. For drilling the first twist drill, you used 800 to 1500 RPMs. Now for inserting the implant, you are going to use very slow speed. It is 20 to 40 RPMs. When we learned the additive processes for implant, we were telling we can coat it with growth factors. Now, bone morphogenic proteins or BMPs are osteoinductive growth factors, and they belong to the TGF-beta superfamily. Out of the many BMPs, the important ones for us are BMPs 2, 3 and 7. BMP 2 has been shown to have the strongest of the bone producing activity. So, 2 is very important in bone producing activity. Similarly, BMP 7, which is known as the osteogenic osteogenic protein. Osteogenic means bone producing. Osteogenic protein 1. So BMP7 is known as OP1. And BMP3, that is simply known as osteogenin. This is also very potent BMPs. So 2, 3 and 7 are very important for us. And remember that 7 is known as OP1 or osteogenic protein 1. Coming to sinus elevation, that is where are we inserting the dental implant into the alveolar bone. When the alveolar bone height is deficient, you cannot insert the dental implant properly. So in this case, you can elevate the maxillary sinus to increase the space for the implant to be there. So the first indication for sinus elevation is alveolar bone height in the posterior maxilla that is deficient. Obviously it is only posterior maxilla because maxillary sinus is occupying the space of the posterior maxilla. That is a alveolar bone height of less than 7 millimeters. If it is present, you can think about sinus elevation. And the second indication is minimum of 5 mm of existing bone should be there. Then only you can simultaneously place an implant. So minimum 5 mm should be there and you don't have 7 mm or more. That is for sinus elevation. The first technique is called the crestal approach. We already said when the bone height is less than 7 mm, we go for sinus elevation. But sometimes there is moderate bone height. There is 7 to 9 millimeters of bone height and it requires a very limited sinus bone augmentation. A crestal approach may be desirable. So look at the figure. Through the alveolar bone crest only, we are approaching the maxillary sinus and we are elevating the maxillary sinus. It is also known as osteotome sinus floor elevation. Using the tool osteotome, you are elevating the maxillary sinus wall. This is a blind technique because we are not seeing the maxillary sinus floor. We are just blindly elevating the sinus floor through the alveolar crest. This is useful when we have to increase the vertical height of the bone up to approximately 4 millimeters. You can get a maximum of only 4 millimeter height gain. That is about the crestal approach for maxillary sinus elevation. Coming to lateral window technique, here we open into the maxillary sinus through the lateral aspect, through the lateral wall. So we are visualizing, not like the blind technique of crestal elevation. We can see the maxillary floor now, and then we can elevate the Schneiderian membrane or the lining of the maxillary sinus. Then we can place the bone graft in the space superior to the existing alveolar bone, and this will increase the height of the alveolar bone. Here we can obtain more amount of alveolar height gain when compared to the crestal approach. Another very important question that has been repeatedly asked in MCQs in NEET exams is the peri-implant bone required for implant. Okay. 1.5 millimeters, 1.5 millimeters of circumferential peri-implant bone is required. The implants benefit from the presence of this 1.5 millimeters of bone circumferentially. So, the standard diameter of an implant is considered to be 4 millimeters. So, when you're keeping a 4 millimeter diameter implant, you want 1.5 millimeters mesial to it, you want 1.5 millimeters distal to it. So, 4 plus 1.5 plus 1.5, 7 millimeter space is required for one implant placement. So the distance of an implant from an adjacent natural tooth is considered to be 1.5 millimeters. We already said it needs 1.5 millimeters of bone circumferentially. So when one implant and one natural tooth are close by, this 1.5 millimeters is enough. When one implant is staying adjacent to another implant, what is happening? One implant needs 1.5 millimeters circumferential to it. The next implant also needs 1.5 millimeters circumferential to it. So when we sum up these two implants, when they are sitting nearby, they need 3 millimeters of distance. Correct? No, 1.5 plus 1.5 distance between two adjacent implants should be 3 millimeters. So this concept should be very clear. For one implant to be placed in the alveolar ridge, you need 7 millimeters of bone. For two implants, you need 7 plus 7, 14 millimeters of alveolar bone. For three implants, you need 21 millimeters of alveolar bone. You are clear with that? Coming to implant abutment connection. When we place an implant, we are inserting a screw into the alveolar bone. Then we need an abutment. Abutment is similar to a prepared tooth over which we will place the crown. So the implant and the abutment connection can be of three types. It can be external connection implant, internal connection implant, and solid body implant. In external connection implant, the external of the implant is going to connect to the abutment. So usually we say the term external internal hex because it is usually hexagonal in shape. And the internal connection implant, you can see from the figure, to inside of the implant the abutment connection is going, and solid body implant is like a single unit. The implant and the abutment is acting as a simple unit. You can directly place the crown over the implant placed. Now another important term that may be asked is called platform switching. Usually we place an implant, over that we place an abutment, and the diameters of the implant and the abutment will be matching. Recently we started placing narrow abutment on wider implants. So implant is our platform. We are switching the platform. We are choosing wider implants, and over that we are keeping some narrow abutments. These are known as platform switched implants. This will help in the long-term stability of the implant. You are distributing the force more evenly onto a wider platform. So this will prevent the crestal bone loss. So that is platform switching. Now the abutment to the crown attachment. We have placed the implant, over that we have placed the abutment, over the abutment we have to place the crown now. This can be cement retained, it can be screw retained. As we all know, cement retained is having more advantage and it is far more durable than the screw retained. Just like after RCT, you prepare the crown and you place the crown over the prepared natural tooth using cements. So it is just like that. Using cement, you are going to place the crown over the abutment. Next type is the hybrid crown or the screw-mentable crown, which means a screwable plus cementable crown. This combines the advantage of both the screwable type and the cementable type here. The crown to the abutment attachment is cementation only, but this is cemented in the laboratory, because when we are cementing, usually the excess cement will cause peri-implantitis. So when it is cemented in the laboratory, excess cement that is easily removed, and this can prevent peri-implantitis. So when we are using the screwable type to prevent this peri-implantitis, what is happening? There will be a hole in the crown. We have to screw the crown over the abutment, right? And this hole will be there. This hole has to be filled later. Now when we are doing this screw-mentable type, you can avoid that also. The hole on the screwable crown is eliminated. The excess cement that was happening as a result of the cementable crown is also eliminated. So that is a screw-mentable crown. It is cemented in the laboratory and then it is screwed upon the implant. Also you have something known as the lingual set screws. So that are the four types, okay? Cementable, screwable, screw-mentable or hybrid type, and the lingual set screws. As you can see from the figure, the screw is on the lingual side. That is why lingual set screw. One more important numerical is anticipated papilla height. There is an average expected papilla height when we are placing implant. Usually between two natural teeth, it should be more than or equal to 5 millimeters. That was given by Tarnow. At least 5 mm of papillary height should be there. When it is between one tooth and one dental implant, we will give some consideration, because whenever we are keeping an implant, it is an external object, and we don't expect this full papillary fill of 5 millimeters. We expect up to 4.2 millimeters. So between a natural tooth and an implant, the expected papillary height is 4.2 millimeters. And it is when it is between two adjacent implants, it should be at least 3.4 millimeters. At least 3.4 millimeters of papillary height should be maintained between two dental implants. Now coming to the final slide, winding the presentation, I want to introduce two terms to you, that is impression copying and impression analog. The impression copying is the material creates or preserves the existing tissue contours in the final impression. So in impression copying there is a CO, in tissue contour also there is a CO. You have to please relate using that. The copying copies the tissue contours or the exact tissue relationship with the implant is transferred using the impression copying, whereas analog is just analogous to the fixture or our dental implant fixture. It is just similar to the implant fixture, just for the laboratory reference. So don't get confused. Copying is used during impression to preserve the tissue contours, and analog is for laboratory use. It will simulate the implant fixture. If you refer the textbook, there will be a lot more information. If you have any doubt regarding any of those, you can please contact me. Please go through the presentation repeatedly, look the figures repeatedly. Thank you.